Before she died, former Graceland Maid finally breaks silence on Elvis Presley. For decades, Elvis Presley's death has been shrouded in the mythology of rock and roll, rumors, speculation, and the overwhelming notion that the king of rock simply succumbed to the pressures of fame and a spiraling addiction. But what if we've all been looking at it wrong? What if the story we've all been told of a man defeated by his demons doesn't fully reflect the truth? This isn't another tabloid account or unsubstantiated gossip. It's a first-hand revelation from someone who lived it. Nancy Rooks. A woman who spent 10 years within the walls of Graceland was the one person who saw Elvis Presley for who he truly was, not the king on stage, but the man behind the rhinestones and the microphone. She witnessed the last moments of his life, and what she has to say decades later shakes the very foundation of everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. As the world was preparing to remember him as a tragic star lost to fame, Nancy, in her final years, spoke out for the first time. She didn't just confirm what we had already heard, she provided a fresh perspective on his last days, revealing that Elvis was not just a man spiraling into despair. He was a man exhausted by the weight of his own life, trying to break free, trying to start over. She shared her quiet, unsettling truth. Elvis wasn't ready to die. Could it be that in his final moments, Elvis Presley was contemplating something far more personal than we ever realized? Was he really planning a comeback, not just to the stage, but to the simple life he longed for outside the spotlight? Nancy's final confession rewrites the last chapter of the Elvis story, suggesting that the king of rock and roll, before his untimely death, might have been on the verge of shedding the heavy mantle of fame, seeking peace and redemption in ways no one had ever imagined. In the quiet intimacy of her recollections, Nancy Rooks gives us a glimpse of the man Elvis could have been if only the world hadn't taken so much from him. What Nancy Rooks reveals in her own unassuming voice doesn't just reshape the story, it reignites the mystery of Elvis Presley's death. And the truth she held back all these years is more powerful than we could have ever expected. How do we remember Elvis now? Not as a lost legend, but as a man who was more than the sum of his struggles, who in his final days might have just been seeking the simplest of things, a chance to start over. Elvis Presley. The name synonymous with rock and roll, was born in Tupelo, Mississippi on January 8, 1935. Raised in poverty, Elvis was no stranger to hardship. His father, Vernon Presley, had trouble maintaining stable employment, and his mother, Gladys Presley, often struggled to provide for the family. Despite their financial troubles, the Presleys were a close-knit unit, with Elvis remaining incredibly devoted to his parents throughout his life. From an early age, Elvis showed an intense interest in music. He grew up listening to gospel, blues, and country music, drawn particularly to the soulful rhythms of African-American spirituals that filled his church and the nearby Beale Street. His talent began to surface at a young age when he started singing at local churches and community gatherings. But it wasn't until Elvis received his first guitar at the age of 11 that his musical dreams started to take shape. As a teenager, Elvis's appearance was marked by the typical Southern boy look: messy, tousled hair, a shy, almost awkward demeanor, and clothes that didn't suggest the rock star he would soon become. But it was his voice, a unique blend of deep Southern charm and rockabilly twang, that caught the attention of his peers. By the time he turned 18, Elvis was already starting to perform at local clubs and talent shows. He was a local sensation, though few could have predicted just how far his star would rise. In 1953, at the age of 18, Elvis made his first recording at Sun Studio in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a simple, humble beginning. He paid $4 to cut a record for his mother's birthday. The song, "My Happiness," was a private gift, but it became the spark that would ignite Elvis's career. Sun Studios founder Sam Phillips heard something in Elvis's voice, an undeniable rawness and passion that was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It was this connection that would ultimately catapult Elvis into the public eye. In 1954, Elvis recorded "That's All Right" at Sun Studio, marking the beginning of what would become one of the most revolutionary movements in music history. The song combined rhythm and blues with country music, creating a fusion that would come to define rock and roll. It didn't take long before Elvis was a sensation across the South, and soon he was signed to RCA Victor. By 1956, Elvis had released his first album with RCA, and his career was officially launched. The summer of 1956 saw Elvis's transformation from regional star to global phenomenon. His first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, became an immediate hit, and the world began to take notice of this young man from Mississippi. With his slicked back hair, swiveling hips, and magnetic stage presence, Elvis Presley wasn't just a musician, he was an icon. His appearance on television shows like The Ed Sullivan Show turned him into a household name, and his popularity reached unprecedented heights. He was more than a rock star. He was a symbol of freedom and rebellion for a generation. But with fame came pressure, and the rapid rise to stardom took a toll on Elvis. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, Elvis's music began to shift. His early rockabilly hits gave way to more polished pop songs, and his love for gospel and blues continued to shine through in his ballads. Yet while his music was evolving, so was Elvis himself. His personal life was beginning to spiral out of control. In 1958, while on top of the world, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army. He spent 2 years stationed in Germany, an experience that was both a challenge and a turning point in his life. The separation from his family, his fans, and the music industry left him feeling isolated, and it was during this time that he became increasingly dependent on prescription medications, a habit that would follow him for the rest of his life. Elvis returned to the U.S. in 1960 and quickly resumed his career, though the toll of military service and personal struggles began to weigh on him. His marriage to Priscilla Beaulieu in 1967 added further complexity to his life. The couple had one daughter, Lisa Marie, in 1968, but the pressures of fame and his increasing reliance on prescription drugs began to take their toll on the relationship. During the late 1960s and 1970s, Elvis's music took another shift. The world was changing, and so was the music industry. While his popularity waned in the face of new musical trends, Elvis adapted with his powerful ballads and his return to a more gospel-infused sound. His Las Vegas residency, which began in 1969, revitalized his career and brought him a new level of fame. He was once again the man the world could not stop talking about. But behind the spotlight, Elvis was struggling. The demands of constant performance and the constant cycle of touring and recording took a toll on his mental and physical health. His marriage to Priscilla ended in 1973, and he seemed to sink deeper into despair. His physical health was in sharp decline, and his dependence on prescription drugs was well known to those close to him. Yet even in his final years, Elvis's love for performing never waned. He would take the stage in his signature jumpsuit, performing with the energy of someone decades younger, despite the toll the years and his lifestyle had taken on him. The final years of Elvis's life were filled with contradictions. There were moments of brilliance like his legendary performances in Las Vegas, where he seemed to be on top of the world. But there were also moments of isolation as he retreated into Graceland, away from the public eye. His physical appearance began to change. He grew heavier, his skin pale, and his face bloated. Yet even in his decline, he remained a symbol of larger-than-life fame, the man who had once redefined music and American pop culture. In the summer of 1977, Elvis was preparing for another comeback. He had a series of tour dates scheduled, and he was reportedly in the process of planning a return to the studio. But on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was attributed to a heart attack, but the circumstances surrounding his death have remained a topic of debate for decades. Was it the result of years of drug abuse? Was he a victim of the pressures of fame, or was there something else, something more complicated at play in those final moments? As Elvis's death became one of the most widely reported events in the world, the legend of the King of Rock and Roll only grew. His life and his death became the subject of countless documentaries, books, and films. Yet amidst all the myths, rumors, and sensational stories, there was one voice that remained silent until now. Nancy Rooks, the Graceland maid who had worked in Elvis's home during his final years, never sought fame or attention. She didn't sell stories or reveal intimate details of her time with Elvis. For years, she stayed quiet, only speaking in brief interviews and the occasional book. But in the final months of her life, she decided to break her silence, revealing a side of Elvis Presley that few knew existed. Nancy's revelations about Elvis in the days leading up to his death, particularly the moments she shared with him in his final hours, offer a deeply personal and human perspective on the man behind the legend. What she shared was not scandal or sensationalism. It was a testament to the complexity of Elvis's final moments, suggesting that Elvis Presley may not have been the broken, defeated man the world had come to believe he was. Through Nancy Rooks's quiet reflections, we learn that Elvis Presley, in his final days, was not ready to die. He was a man who was tired, yes, but also someone who was still fighting, still thinking of a future beyond the fame that had once defined him. Elvis Presley's ascent to stardom was as revolutionary as it was rapid. His rise was not just the story of a man with a gift for music, but a story of how an artist can capture the very essence of a time and transform it into something eternal. Born into a working-class family in Tupelo, Mississippi, Elvis's early life was shaped by poverty, but it was also shaped by the deep sense of soul and spirituality that ran through the heart of the American South. It was these very roots that would give rise to a new kind of music rock and roll, crafted from the rich traditions of gospel, blues, and country, fused into a sound that would change the world forever. In the mid-1950s, America was on the brink of transformation. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and a new generation of youth was looking for something that reflected their hopes and frustrations. Into this cultural maelstrom came Elvis Presley, a man whose voice embodied the rebellious energy of rock and roll. His rise to fame was as much about the seismic shifts in American society as it was about his extraordinary musical talent. Elvis's musical journey began in earnest when he walked into Sun Studio in Memphis in 1953 to record a birthday gift for his mother. His rendition of My Happiness caught the attention of Sam Phillips, the owner of the studio, who recognized the unique potential in the young man. At the time, Phillips was searching for an artist who could bridge the gap between the races, combining the rhythm and soul of black music with the melodies of country and Western. Elvis was the answer. In 1954, Elvis recorded his first significant song, That's All Right, which was an amalgamation of blues and country, a genre-defining moment. This was the moment that marked the birth of a sound that would come to be known as rockabilly, and with it, Elvis Presley would redefine what it meant to be a star. The success of the song catapulted him into the regional spotlight, but it was only the beginning. Elvis's breakthrough came in 1956 with the release of his first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel. The song's success was meteoric. It reached #1 on the Billboard pop charts, and Elvis became a household name almost overnight. The public couldn't get enough of him. His charisma, combined with his deep, soulful voice and distinct style, made him irresistible. He was more than just a singer. He was a phenomenon. His stage presence, marked by his trademark gyrating hips, set him apart from other entertainers of the time, and it quickly became his trademark. The combination of his good looks, smooth moves, and raw talent left audiences spellbound. The Elvis Presley of the mid-50s wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of youth culture, rebellion, and freedom. In 1956, Elvis made his iconic appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, a performance that would cement his place in history. The show, which was watched by millions, featured Elvis in all his youthful energy. The audience screamed, fainted, and cheered as Elvis sang his hits. The way he moved, the way he owned the stage, and the energy he brought to the performance were unlike anything television had seen before. The Elvis effect had taken hold of America, and the rest of the world would soon follow suit. As Elvis's popularity surged, so did his reputation as the king of rock and roll. His film career, launched with Love Me Tender in 1956, seemed to mirror the rise of his musical career. He was a natural on screen, playing the role of the brooding young man with charm and an undeniable magnetism. His movies, though formulaic and often criticized for their lack of depth, were incredibly successful and reinforced his image as the quintessential rock and roll star. Over the next few years, Elvis starred in a string of films, solidifying his place in both the music and film industries. Despite the success, the pressure began to mount. By the late 1950s, Elvis was an international sensation, but with that fame came complications. In 1957, at the height of his success, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army. This was a pivotal moment in his life and career. While in Germany, he spent 2 years away from the spotlight, which not only put his career on pause, but also exposed him to a world of isolation and reflection. Though he would later recall his time in the Army as a challenge, it also became a moment for him to grow as a person. He would later return to music with a new perspective, although some of the raw energy that had marked his early success was never quite the same. Upon his return to the U.S. in 1960, Elvis faced a rapidly changing music industry. The cultural shifts brought about by the early 60s, the British invasion, and the rise of new rock acts left Elvis facing an uncertain future. He adapted by recording a string of successful ballads and more mainstream pop tracks with hits like Are You Lonesome Tonight? And It's Now or Never. However, many critics felt he had lost the edge that had made him so compelling in the 50s. Still, Elvis was a master of reinvention, and his ability to remain relevant in the music scene proved his resilience. The 1960s also marked a personal turning point for Elvis. In 1967, he married Priscilla Beaulieu, whom he had met in Germany during his army stint. Their relationship, while often marked by the strains of fame and public scrutiny, resulted in the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, in 1968. Elvis, now a husband and father, was transitioning from the wild, freewheeling young man of the 50s to the more settled family man of the 60s. Yet the pressures of fame, his reliance on prescription medications, and the stress of a marriage under constant public examination began to take their toll. In the late 1960s, Elvis found a new creative outlet in his live performances. After a string of less successful films, he returned to the stage in 1968 for his legendary Comeback Special, a televised concert that rejuvenated his career. The special showcased a raw, unfiltered Elvis, who performed in a way that was intimate and personal, reminding audiences of the fire that had once made him the king. The special marked his return to the music industry as a live performer, and soon after, Elvis embarked on a series of successful concert tours. By the early 1970s, Elvis had solidified his status as the king of rock and roll, but his life was far from stable. His health was deteriorating. His marriage to Priscilla was crumbling, and his dependence on prescription medications was escalating. His Las Vegas residencies, which began in 1969, were a critical success, and they represented a rebirth for Elvis as a live performer. But behind the scenes, he was grappling with the demands of fame, the pressure of his own expectations, and the toll that constant performing was taking on his body. Despite these challenges, Elvis continued to perform, and his shows in Las Vegas were among the most anticipated events of the year. His emotional depth, combined with his undeniable charisma, made his live performances unforgettable. But as the 70s wore on, it was clear that the man who had once been the world's biggest rock star was no longer the same. His body began to show the strain of years of hard living, and his energy on stage became more erratic. The man who had once been known for his electrifying stage presence was now battling health issues, prescription drug abuse, and personal turmoil. In the final years of his life, Elvis was still performing, but his personal struggles were evident. His Las Vegas shows continued to sell out, but his performances were often marked by fatigue and inconsistency. His once immaculate appearance was now marred by bloating, weight gain, and a general sense of weariness. Yet despite the visible signs of decline, Elvis Presley remained a powerful presence on stage. His fans continued to adore him, and his legend only seemed to grow larger. Throughout his rise to fame, Elvis Presley was always more than just a musician. He was a cultural force, a symbol of change, and a man who both embodied and transcended the very time in which he lived. His rise was not just about selling records or performing to packed arenas. It was about how he reshaped the American musical landscape and became the personification of a generation's desires, frustrations, and dreams. The icon that Elvis Presley became was a result of more than just talent. It was a result of timing charisma and the deep, unshakable connection he had with his audience. His rise was meteoric, and his impact on the world of music, fashion, and pop culture remains unmatched. His voice, his style, and his personality became woven into the fabric of American life. And in the years following his death, his legacy would only continue to grow, reinforcing his status as the king of rock and roll. Behind the glittering lights of Elvis Presley's legendary career lay a darker, more complicated story. A tale of addiction, isolation, and a man who was trapped within the very fame that had once elevated him to unimaginable heights. The public saw the dazzling star, the icon in sequins, the king who seemed invincible. But those closest to him, like Nancy Rooks and a select few who knew him behind the velvet ropes of Graceland, saw a man slowly deteriorating under the weight of his own success, the pressure of constant public adoration, and the painful isolation that came with it. From the very beginning of his career, Elvis's life was a whirlwind of constant motion. He was a global sensation by the age of 21, a fame unlike anything the world had ever seen. But while the world watched with awe, Elvis was struggling to keep up with the demands of being the biggest star on the planet. It wasn't just the performances, the films, or the adoring fans that overwhelmed him. It was the expectations. Expectations of perfection, of being the eternal king, of maintaining a public image that was larger than life itself. The beginning of Elvis's struggles can be traced to the moment he was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958. Though he served honorably, his time in Germany exposed him to the realities of fame and loneliness. His isolation from his family and friends, combined with the depression of being cut off from his music career, led him to find solace in prescription drugs. The Army did little to prepare him for the emotional toll that being a global superstar would take. Once he returned home, he would lean heavily on the use of painkillers, amphetamines, and barbiturates, a combination that would plague him for the rest of his life. Elvis's battle with addiction was not something new in the world of rock stars, but it was particularly destructive for him. His dependence on prescription drugs wasn't merely recreational. It became a crutch that allowed him to keep up with the grueling schedule that his fame demanded. And though he sought help at times, the access to powerful drugs combined with the enabling environment of people around him prevented him from truly breaking free. Throughout the 1960s, Elvis's career began to shift, and his personal life followed suit. The pressure of being the undisputed king of rock took a toll on his mental health, and the pressures to live up to the image he had created for himself became unbearable. In the midst of his fame, Elvis was a man plagued by deep insecurities. His marriage to Priscilla, which began in 1967, did little to ease his emotional struggles. By the time they separated in 1973, Elvis was more withdrawn than ever. The dissolution of his marriage marked the beginning of an even darker chapter in his life. Elvis's physical appearance also began to change during this period. The man who once embodied youthful energy and good looks was now heavier, more bloated, and his skin began to show signs of wear. In photos taken during the mid-70s, his face seemed strained, his eyes more distant, and his once sharp jawline softened by the weight gain. His performances, once electric and full of life, began to seem more strained and erratic. His health was deteriorating at an alarming rate, but he continued to perform often with great difficulty. As Elvis's health declined, his reliance on prescription drugs became even more apparent. His doctors were no strangers to the pressures of fame themselves, and many turned a blind eye to Elvis's growing addiction. He was often seen on stage barely able to catch his breath, slurring words or making bizarre comments to the audience. Still, his fans continued to adore him, and the demand for his performances never waned. He was still the king to them, despite the obvious physical and emotional toll that fame had taken. The dark side of Elvis's life came to a head on the fateful morning of August 16, 1977. Despite reports from those close to him that Elvis was preparing for a comeback, he was found unresponsive in his bathroom at Graceland. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the circumstances surrounding his death have remained shrouded in mystery. What's often glossed over in the official accounts is the state of Elvis's health in the days leading up to his death. According to Nancy Rooks, who had witnessed him closely in his final months, Elvis had been struggling with intense fatigue and a constant battle with his body. Yet he had spoken of plans to clean up his act, to leave Graceland and start fresh, somewhere far from the chaos of his celebrity life. Elvis had been talking about taking time off from the spotlight, finding peace and quiet away from the relentless demands of fame. His final moments, as described by those who were closest to him, didn't match the image of the man who was simply consumed by drugs and despair. Nancy Rooks recalls the final day she saw Elvis. He had been playing racquetball, moving around the house, and even engaging in conversations with his staff. He wasn't bedridden or unconscious, and there were no signs of the man who was supposed to be spiraling out of control. In fact, according to her, he had eaten less, showing signs of diminished appetite, but his movements were still relatively normal. It wasn't until that final morning when he asked for water that anyone truly began to sense something wasn't right. His body language was different. He moved slowly, more deliberately, as if every movement was an effort. Then came the discovery. Elvis, in the early hours of the morning, collapsed in his bathroom, and despite efforts to revive him, he was pronounced dead shortly after. His sudden death shocked the world, but it was his state of health in the days prior that left many wondering if the truth behind his death was being hidden. Many believe that the official cause of death, a heart attack, masked the true nature of Elvis's struggle. Was it truly just his heart that gave out, or was it the years of physical and emotional strain, the constant battle with prescription drugs, and the crushing pressure of fame that ultimately led to his demise? Some conspiracy theories suggest that there was a cover-up, that his death was somehow more than just a tragic accident, but the details have never been definitively confirmed. What we do know is this: Elvis Presley's death was not just the end of a career. It was the end of a complicated life marked by excess loneliness, addiction, and a man who was never truly able to escape the enormous weight of his fame. The king was gone, but the questions surrounding his death remain unanswered even now, decades later. For those who knew him intimately, including Nancy Rooks, Elvis's final days were not the dramatic collapse that many had assumed. Rather, they were the quiet, slow unraveling of a man who had been worn down by years of being the king of rock and roll, who had never really had the chance to just be himself. As Nancy herself put it, Elvis was not ready to die, not in the way the world thought. He was tired, yes, but he was still trying. And it is that truth, the one that Nancy held close for so long, that paints a different picture of Elvis Presley, one that is more human and more tragic than the legend that continues to live on. As the world continues to remember Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll, his legacy remains one of immense power and influence. Yet the final revelations of his life, as shared by those who truly knew him, offer a deeper, more complex portrait of the man behind the legend. Through the quiet reflections of Nancy Rooks, the longtime maid who lived behind the walls of Graceland, we uncover a side of Elvis Presley that had been hidden from the public for years, a side that shows a man not consumed by fame, but a man still fighting, still yearning for something more than the life he had built for himself. In her final months, Nancy broke her silence, offering a powerful and poignant perspective on the last days of Elvis's life. What she revealed wasn't just a confession, it was a reimagining of Elvis Presley, a human being who, despite his flaws, was trying to reclaim his peace. He was not simply a victim of his fame or a tragic star lost to addiction. No, Elvis Presley was the man who, even in his final moments, was seeking something beyond the noise, something beyond the world that had built him up and then torn him down. Elvis had spoken to Nancy about starting over, about escaping the clutches of fame and the pressures that came with it. He wasn't just mentally defeated, he was trying, even in the face of exhaustion, to reset his life to find redemption. Nancy's words open a window into a side of Elvis that many never got to see: a man exhausted but not defeated, still searching for peace and healing. It's a heartbreaking truth. Elvis Presley wasn't ready to die. He was simply too tired to keep fighting the battles that had been waged against him for years. And perhaps this is the true legacy of Elvis Presley, not just the glitz and glamour of his star-studded career, but the quiet struggles he faced behind closed doors. For those who loved him like Nancy, the King was not just an icon. He was a man who, despite his flaws, had a heart that was still willing to fight for a better life. And now, as the world continues to celebrate his musical contributions, we are reminded that behind every legend is a person with dreams, with struggles, and with a desire for something more. As we reflect on the untold story of Elvis Presley's life and death, let us remember him as more than just the king of rock and roll. Let us honor him as a man who was more than his fame, more than the pressure of being an icon. And as we dive deeper into the untold truths of legends like Elvis, remember that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones told by those who stayed in the background, those who were closest to the stars, yet rarely heard. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of Elvis Presley. For more revealing stories, behind-the-scenes insights, and untold truths about Black excellence in music history and culture, make sure to subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Join the conversation in the comments below and share your thoughts. What do you think about the true story of Elvis Presley? We'd love to hear your opinions.